Keith? 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 Keith, there you are. Let's go. I need you. Hello, Vermont. Have you been looking for Keith too? Well, look no further. I'm not going anywhere, but beginning this Monday, August 3rd, Mondays on Across the Fence will feature a familiar face and maybe even a few familiar stories. If you're new to Across the Fence, Keith Silva has been a fixture of our show for 30 years. Right out of Norwich University, he joined the team as a videographer editor and rose through the ranks, taking the helm as producer in 2023. Keith even brushed off the old suit and took over as host after the departure of my predecessor, Jolie Whitney. Over the past year, you've seen him here in the host's chair on and off, and now we're excited to be making that a more regular occurrence. So Keith Silva, welcome back to Across the Fence.
Thank you. It's a little weird to sit in this chair, but I'll get used to it.
You will get used to it. So I want to take folks back when we get started. Last summer, folks might remember that Across the Fence was inducted into the Agricultural Hall of Fame. And at the Agricultural Hall of Fame induction ceremony, there was a really, moving speech given about Across the Fence, and Keith got a chance to go up and accept on behalf of the team. And Keith, you cried. Very manly tears, I will say. But that was, I thought, was really moving as your colleague and also as somebody who was new to Across the Fence at that moment in time. And I wanted you to tell folks what was going on there.
Well, I think one of the big things is the reason that the Vermont Ag Hall of Fame even happened was in thanks in part to our team, our organization. Former Director of Extension, Roy Beckford, was instrumental in making that happen. We all stand on the shoulder of giants, so to speak. And so I had this crazy idea that I felt that, having Across the Fence as part of the Ag Hall of Fame would be a good idea. And Roy took it and ran with it. And it is a little odd, they honor people, but they also honor farms. And, I think what it does is it speaks to the uniqueness of Vermont, being able to sort of think outside the box, as many farmers do, and also the uniqueness of our program. It is really, as much as we have our differences when it comes to recording something like this and talking about ourselves.
Although actually, you know what? I'm going to interject right here because I want to nudge your answer because as much as what I actually want to know is what was going on with the tears. And the reason why, well, the reason why is because I want people to understand, 30 years is a long time to dedicate yourself to one pursuit, to one career. You and I,
another thing we've talked about.
Another thing we've talked about, probably ad infinitum. But talk a little bit about what this show, and particularly those pieces that that brought us, that make us a natural induction member into the Ag Hall of Fame, have meant to you over the years.
So I think my emotions had less to do with Across the Fence going into the Hall of Fame than it had to do with my family being there and the idea that I think, I'm sorry to have brought this on you. It's been almost a year, but you never stop thinking about this. You never stop thinking about show ideas, questions, and your family is the front line for all that. There'll be times where we're driving in the car and I'll be like, what do you guys think about this? And my daughter would be like, that's so random, Dad. And my wife would be like, he's asking you for the stupid show.
I know, it's true. This is what our families go through. All of the random brain non sequiturs where we're like, ooh, great idea.
Right. Have you ever seen this? What do you know about,
well, speaking of
robots?
Yeah, speaking of Keith's brain, something that I quickly learned coming on the show is that you have like a mental Rolodex of shows that we do at particular times of year and guests that we tend to talk to. And around the office, we sometimes call it classic fence, lovingly call it classic fence. And that led us to what we are starting coming this Monday. Talk about the kinds of episodes. So like I said, folks, you're going to be seeing Keith every Monday hosting the show. And there's going to be a particular flavor to some of those episodes. So talk a little bit about what you're working on.
So I think one of the things that, our show lends itself to is we are an ag show. That is, those were our roots in agriculture, in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, in Extension, in UVM. And so when we do programs, we follow the seasons. We're very much, we follow the ag seasons. And so, when it's March and April, it's time for maple. And those are just things that are, just intrinsic in the show. Do we have to do that? No, we don't have to, but I think it's just one of those things that our show is about.
It's become a signature. It's a signature of the show.
But our show is about Vermont.
Right.
And what happens in Vermont in April and March, and what happens in Vermont in July, and those sorts of things.
We talk about this a lot, that for not being a news show, that we do try to be timely. Right?
Timely,
yes. So that we are, because we're all living through these Vermont moments together, and when we can anchor our shows into something that folks are experiencing, then that's kind of like we say sometimes, the right conversation at the right time.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but I bet you also there are stories out of Extension that you have been following for years, because this is the nature of research, right? It's like, research really never ends. You're just sort of building on prior discoveries and prior innovations. So are there some things out of Extension that you've been following that you're excited to follow up on?
I think one of the things that is interesting is that it's the evolution. It's sort of what you're talking about a little bit is, there's always new things in ag. Ag is the most technological of, any human development. It's always leading with agriculture. This past week, earlier this week, we saw a program where they have robots now that are mowing and weeding fields in Vermont, which is very exciting. So I think one of the things I'm interested in following up on is, as we do this series, is sort of catching up with old friends, but also remembering that, people don't know what happens on farms. People don't know a lot about the food system. Something that that you have a lot of experience with, and just introducing people to that. That's why we do our show. That's why we like what we do.
Yes, I have a pointed question. As you go out into the field, as you sit here with farmers, et cetera, members of the ag community, will you continue to wear the suits?
I wore the green today because we shot our cold open. I was wearing these pants, and probably not. I much prefer to wear shorts and
Ooh, I don't
be
know about
comfortable.
Shorts on a host. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. That might be a bridge too far, but okay.
I like to be comfortable when we're out in the field, when we're working. So no, I probably won't wear the jacket.
I've always thought it was a nice sort of an artifact from the fact that you also too sometimes call yourself a reporter. Like I think on your LinkedIn page, you call yourself a reporter. So maybe it's a little bit of that reporter style.
Okay.
So, well, after 30 years, are there topics on which you consider yourself a bit of an expert?
I've been thinking about this question since you shared the script
alert,
with me.
He saw the script. Okay.
Yeah. And I think for someone who speaks another language, as you do, what I would say is I'm conversant, but I am not a native speaker. I would never ever claim. Former colleague Will Michael used to say, "We know enough to be dangerous," and that is sort of. On the across the fence crest, that's what it should say. We know enough to be dangerous.
I want that T-shirt.
But so yeah, I think that's the big thing is, do I know things about maple and, milking cows and things? Yes, but I've never tapped a tree. I've never milked a cow. And I leave that to the experts.
Well, does that influence how you go about putting an episode together? I always think it's really interesting. Hopefully this is interesting to folks at home. How these shows come together. How do we think about what we're going to talk about? What should the questions be? Does that perspective and that deep history, does that influence how you put an episode together?
Absolutely. I think one of the big things is, just putting yourself in the place of the viewer, just trying to think of, if I was a viewer. I think the thing that I struggle with the history and legacy that, my time here is, we've done that before. I think there's times when you've brought ideas, into our pitch meetings and been like, okay, well, we did that, for 10 years straight or whatever. We don't need to go back. And, you remind me that, well, so-and-so doesn't know anything about that, or it's new to so-and-so. And I think that's the other thing about Vermont, that's the other thing about the nature of television, that's the thing about what we do, is you got to remind people where their food comes from.
Sure.
You know,
Yep.
where these things are.
Well, and we've been talking about there being a vibe shift on Across the
Yes,
Fence. That was
yes.
the term we came up with about a year ago. How do you see these new Mondays fitting into that sort of vibe shift? Because we're moving forward, and yet we're also taking a moment to do this tiny, almost like little reflection step in order to ground ourselves even more deeply in what Across the Fence has been over
Right.
the decades.
I think one of the things that comes to mind when you say that is years ago, I know people, the cold opens are a great example of
Right.
our vibe shift, right? So, and we've heard from viewers, we've heard from colleagues, they like the cold opens. I've also heard people say, I miss the music, I miss the intro music.
I thought you were going to say the table, and I was
Oh.
no.
Yes, I have heard people say they've missed the table, including one of our guests coming up said, oh, you're in the chairs now, right? I said, yes, the chairs. But anyhow, so make a long story short, sorry. I think the thing that I'm thinking about is classic contemporary, and I think that's is trying to move forward while also being true to our roots and being true to what we've always been.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, so here is a sneak peek opportunity. Would you like to tell folks about the show that's coming up this Monday?
Yes, so when you tune in on Monday, August 3rd, we are talking about Open Farm Week, which is a very incredible program that's run through Extension and through other partners, the Agency of Ag, NOFA, all these other folks. And basically, it's an open studio week.
Yeah.
And people can go to farms.
Open Farm Week.
Open Farm Week, but it's like an open studio week when
Okay.
artists open their
Oh,
doors.
okay, there you go.
and
I
they're
thought you meant
okay.
open studio here. I'm
Oh,
like, well,
no,
they're
no,
not
no.
all coming, Keith, but there you go. All right.
No, so like artists open their studio
Yeah.
and show people. Farms do the same thing, and that's what Open Farm Week is about. And it's not just food, it's fiber, it's fuel.
Yep. And
it's all
this is
this
another
stuff.
one of those types of shows that we can do every year, and that
Sure.
we should do every year.
Yeah, because it's a great thing.
Yep. So, what would you like to say to folks about these Mondays on Across the Fence?
I would say tune in. That was the thing I would say. And sometimes you'll see some of your old favorites, folks that you have known on Across the Fence for many years. And other times it'll be new people, but there'll always be stories about Vermont, and there'll always be stories to make you better know your friends and neighbors and Across the Fence.
Yeah. And honestly, I would say that there is probably no better person to be able to do that than Keith, because of the fact that, again, 30 years on this program, that mental Rolodex, we decided, hey, let's really put that one to use. So Keith Silva, welcome back, and good luck. I'll see you on Monday.
Yes. You'll see me on Monday. Very
All right.
well.
And as always, thank you, Vermont, for learning and exploring with me today. And thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.